Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I am Sean and today I am doing a TBR swap. So I had this idea to swap to be read books with another booktuber, and so Maria from Read Fine Books took me up on this offer. So what we decided to do is we took 3 books from each other's to be read lists and read them. So we read each other's to be read books. The 3 books I chose to read from her are The Fountains of Silence by, I don't know how to pronounce it, Ruta Sepetys? I don't know. She is the author of Salt to the Sea, which was a pretty popular book, and Fountains of Silence is pretty popular as well. I also read The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett and Bloodchild by Olivia Butler. So let's begin with those, beginning with The Fountains of Silence. Now, when Maria listed that as one of her to-be-read books, I was kind of like, oh, why? Because I actually read or tried to read Salt to the Sea by the same author, and I didn't like it because of one very specific reason, and that is that the chapters were all very short, like 1 to 3 pages every single chapter of the book, without fail, 1 to 3 pages. And I just didn't like that because it's like you can't even begin to get into a chapter and then it ends. And then it switches to another character, and by the time it gets back to that original character, I already kind of forgot who they were and what was going on with them. So I just hate that format of real short chapter, real short chapter, real short chapter, real short chapter. It just lulls me to sleep. So I just don't like that writing style. So when I saw that book, Fountains of Silence, on her to-be-read list, I was kind of like, I wouldn't read this otherwise, but I did, or at least I tried. So I picked it up from the library and I read probably around 50, maybe 75 pages, and it was the same problem. I just cannot get into her writing style because, again, it's the same way. It's very short chapters, and I just don't like that. The one thing I do like about the author, Ruta Sepetys, is I think she kind of writes about some more obscure historical events. So, for instance, Salt to the Sea was about the sinking of, I think it's called the William Gustloff. But basically, like, a lot of people think the worst, like, sea disaster ever was Titanic. And in Titanic, like, 1,400 or 1,500 people died. But in the William Gustloff sinking, which was just after World War II, or like just at the end of World War II, I think like 10,000 people died. What happened was a Soviet submarine sank this German boat that was like trying to escape with all these refugees, and there were like 10,000 people on the ship, civilians trying to get away, and they torpedoed the ship and they all drowned. So that's like the most fatal sinking at sea, I think. So that's a pretty obscure historical moment. I mean, it's a real important historical moment, but not a lot of people know about it. This one, Fountains of Silence, is about the Spanish Civil War and like the aftermath of that, which, again, not much is known about the Spanish Civil War or the dictatorship of Francisco Franco. So I like that the author kind of picks these topics that are not very well known to people. I think that's cool. As a lover of history myself, I do like that. It's just her writing style. I can't get into it. So anyway, genuinely, I did try to read the book. I gave it 50, 75 pages or so, but I just can't get into her writing style. So I don't know if I rated this book or not, but yeah. The Vanishing Half, of course, I'd seen this book around everywhere because, I mean, it's a newer book and it's pretty popular. And so when this was on her to-be-read list, I was kind of like, I don't really like reading much current books. But that was the whole point of this to-be-read list swap, that we read books that we wouldn't otherwise probably read. So this was on her list, so I gave it a chance. So as is my custom, I didn't know anything about this book before reading it. I didn't read the back of the book or anything. So when I started, I thought it was just okay. But then about 10-15 pages in, I encountered a problem, and that was, are they similes? Where it's like as if something. And since I like doing this, I'll actually read them out. Page 13. As if those lions might spring to life at any moment to maul her. Page 14, the next page. as if she wanted to sit on that plush bench and rub scented cream onto her hands like Aubrey Hepburn might. Next sentence. As if she lived in a world where women did such a thing. Same page. As if he were quizzing himself. Next page. As if an escape door had appeared before her. Page 21, so 6 pages later. As if she were hoping Desire, I don't know how to pronounce her name, might turn her down. 6 pages later. As if she were dreaming. Same paragraph. As if it were a normal morning. So I read those, and pretty much after the second or third one, I started tracking them because that's just the way I am. I'm kind of obsessive about that. Now, I thought that would be a big issue, so I thought I would just have a whole book list of as-ifs. But after that last as-if around page 27 or so, I didn't actually notice any more from that point on. So there were those about, 8 or 9 as-ifs in a short span of about 10 pages. But after that, they kind of went away, so that was not actually as much of an issue as I thought it would be. And what's more, at that point, I began to actually encounter a few lines that I really liked. So I'll just read a couple of those. The last thing she wanted was to love someone else who looked just like herself. I like that. That's a good line. And then, he wasn't a settling man. He was only good at getting lost. Again, that's another good line. So after reading those couple lines, I was kind of a bit more hopeful of the book, especially after not seeing any more as-ifs. So from that point on, I was kind of reading the book like blank slate. Like, okay, you have a chance, book, to impress me. And another problem came up, and that is that with this book, so much of it pertains to race. I mean, like every single thing about everything is about skin color, white or black. And I just find that so tiresome when books are like that. I mean, maybe it's not every book, but just a lot of books that do that are just tiresome to me because it's always focusing on race about everything. And I think race is really like one of the least interesting things about people. I mean, yes, it could have a big impact on who you are and like how you are perceived by the world and how you perceive the world. But when just every single thing about everything is about race and white and black, it's just tiresome to me because people should be so much more than just the color of their skin or the color of other people's skins. So I can understand why this book is popular right now because race is just such a prominent topic. But personally, I just find it exhausting. There should be something more to the book than just black or white. I just find that so boring and tiresome and not very interesting. So anyway, rating it, I'm not sure what I gave it, but personally I would just probably give the book maybe 2 or 3 stars. I would give it 3 stars just because of those couple good sentences that I read. But otherwise, I thought the book was just okay. It's definitely not a 1-star book. I didn't hate it, like even though the racism stuff, the constant race angle or whatever, was tiresome, it wasn't a book that I just utterly hated. It's just tiresome to me. So it's not a 1-star book, so it's either a 2 or 3-star book from me. But if that's not a problem for you, if you like just can't get enough about race, you'll probably like this book very well. If the author were to do a book that's like not so much about race, I would be more interested in it. But if it's the same thing, just constant race about everything, I probably wouldn't read anything else by her. So anyway, it gets about 2 stars for me, maybe 3, just for the couple good sentences. And the third and final book from Maria's to-be-read list that I read was Bloodchild by Olivia Butler. So this is the first Olivia Butler book that I've read. I vaguely had heard of that name before, but I didn't know anything about her. So the first thing is, I did not know that Olivia Butler was black and also that she was a science fiction writer. So I thought that was pretty cool, a black science fiction writer. I'd never heard of that. I didn't know there were black science fiction writers. I, of course, am not a fan of science fiction, so I mean, I just don't read the genre anyway, but that I thought was interesting. So even though I generally don't even want to know about the authors, just because I like reading it blind, I don't like like being prejudiced at all against the writers. So I like just reading a book and either the author can pull me in with their writing or not. That is the way I like to read. So I don't like to know everything about the writer, like even their gender or their race or anything. But since I found out the author is a black female writing science fiction, I thought that was just interesting and may make it like a unique reading experience, just because it's like a background that most science fiction writers would not come from. So I was curious how she was as a writer. So for this one, I actually wish I remembered more of it because I read it probably like close to 6 months ago or so. And the thing was, this is a collection of short stories, which at first I was like, oh, I don't really like short stories. But in this case, I think it actually helped because since I'm not really a fan of science fiction, I probably would not have the patience to read like a 300-page story. So really, reading about a 15, maybe 20-page short story was just about perfect for me because I mean, I could stomach reading a short story for, 10, 15, 20 pages. And if I don't like it, well, then, oh well, then I just didn't really like that story and I could move on to the next one. With this one, I really liked like the first 3 or 4 stories that I read. I wish I could say more about each story in this book, but I really can't. But the main thing is I liked most of them. The first one, I think, Bloodchild, I think it was. I think that was like the story about like this worm-like alien creature. And what they do is they basically mate with humans, especially like human children, which is definitely like a weird thing. Oh, by the way, they also tend to like male human children. So they like impregnate, I think, male boys. So that is just like so bizarre, and it would be like, I don't want to touch anything to do with that. I mean, mating with children, but it's a worm mating with like human boys. I mean, that is just like so bizarre that I don't know. It would definitely creep me out if it was like humans reproducing with male boys, but a worm doing it? I don't know. It's just ridiculous, and I liked that part of it. And it actually took me a while to really figure out what was going on here. Because again, I don't read like the summaries of the books or anything, so I'm just reading this book not knowing at all what to expect. And then it's like, okay, there's this worm-like alien creature, and then it's like, wait a minute, are they doing what I think they're doing? Yes, they are. And anyway, I just liked it. I mean, it's weird, but I liked it, and I thought it was well written as well. The other stories in the book, I liked pretty well as well. I mean, there was like one where this woman's like mother is in this hospital because like they mentally deteriorate for some reason. I don't remember the specifics of it, but there was that story. I like that pretty well. There's a story about like everyone in society loses their voice. And again, that was pretty interesting. And there were a couple other stories in this collection that I liked as well. So all in all, this actually made me appreciate Octavia Butler's writing. Another thing that really helped was at the end of each of these books, there is like an afterword where Octavia Butler talks about each story and the inspiration behind them and like why she wrote them, when she wrote them, what she thinks about them, like if she likes the story or not or whatever. And also her introduction in this book, where she basically says like she is not really much of a short story writer. The things that she wrote in the introduction and in the afterword to each story, that also endeared me a lot to Octavia Butler because she kind of seemed like a lot like me, or a lot like how I wish I could be. Like she was very much kind of self-deprecating humor where she would say, you know, like, oh, I'm not very good at short stories. I don't really like writing short stories. And just all this stuff, and how she would say like this one isn't my best work and whatever. That to me actually is like endearing, because it's not a writer saying like this magnificent story and this superbly told page turner. I just find that exhausting, and it's like that's just tooting your own horn. But for Octavia Butler, she's very much like, meh, I'm not so good at this. And I was just like, oh, I like her for that reason. So anyway, she just kind of appeared like a real humble person, kind of like a writer's writer. So from a personal standpoint, reading that introduction and those afterwards, I was kind of like, I like Octavia Butler. She seems like a cool person. So as a writer, both like a technical skills standpoint, the stories themselves, I like those. So she's a good writer, I think. And also like as a person, she seems pretty cool. So all in all, I think Octavia Butler like jumped up my to be read list. I probably would never have read her anyway. And I'm not much of a fan of science fiction, but if I do read science fiction, I will probably in the future try to prioritize reading her books a bit more. So like if I see a book by Octavia Butler on the shelf, I may pick it up. So of the three books, The Fountains of Silence, The Vanishing Half, and Bloodchild, I definitely like Bloodchild and Octavia Butler the most. So this one, I think I gave it 4 stars. I wouldn't quite say it's like a masterpiece, but all in all, they were all good reads and I enjoyed them. So Octavia Butler, definitely have a favorable opinion of her. Okay, now the books that were on my to-be read list that Maria was to read, and I kind of feel bad about this for the reasons you'll see. First on the list was Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass, and this was actually supposed to be on my to-be read list for this year. For some reason, I thought this was actually a novel, and I think the reason is because I probably read the introduction. Like I just opened the book and read the first few lines and was like, oh, this is a novel. But it wasn't. I was probably just reading the introduction. So all this is poetry. And that's what Walt Whitman was. It was a poet. So when I saw that this was just a collection of poems, I was like, I probably wouldn't want to read this anyway. So what I did is I basically flipped through the book and I picked like 5 poems at random and tried to read them. But I honestly think I did not get to the second verse of any one of those poems. If I did not get to the 3rd verse probably. It just all goes in one ear and out the other. Poetry is really just not my thing. The only poet I kind of like is Shel Silverstein. I like him. But all in all, I just do not like poetry. I do not like poems. I do not like poets. It's just not for me. I don't really respect it as an art form. I kind of think poetry is just meaningless trash. And yeah. So when I saw this was poems, I just gave like 5 poems a chance just to see if maybe I would like them. And I also looked up like the most famous poems in this book. And like I tried reading a couple of those, and same thing, it's just doing nothing for me, going in one ear and out the other. So poetry is just not for me, so I didn't really even genuinely try to read this. I mean, I tried to read like 5 poems, but anyway, it's just not for me. I don't like poetry, so this one, I'm just not really reading. Next, also on my 2023 list was In Scott Momaday, Housemaid of Dawn, and this is a signed copy, which is real sweet. This is a book off the top 1000 list by James Mustich, 1000 Books to Read Before You Die. And so I saw this at the bookstore, a signed copy, and I was like, ooh, that's a top 1000 books. So I got it, and I didn't know anything about what to expect from this book. I looked it up and I saw that this book is like one of the more renowned books by like American Indian authors. So I thought that was pretty cool, and having a signed copy, I was like, oh, nice. Oh, and I also won a Pulitzer, which is actually a bad sign to me because I don't think I've ever read a book that won a Pulitzer that I've liked. So to me, the Pulitzer is a mark of a bad book. I have said before that I hope I never write a book so bad that it wins a Pulitzer. That's kind of my goal. So Maria actually read this book before I could give it a chance, so I don't want to put words in her mouth. I will like link her video. Maria basically said she didn't really like this book too much, and just it was kind of difficult to follow, and just the narrative was kind of confusing to her. So she just didn't really like it. So when I heard that, I was kind of like, oh God, I'm going to hate this book. If she didn't like it, I'm going to like utterly hate it because I know I am a pretty harsh reader. So anyway, that tanked my like hopes for this book. And basically, yeah, I have the same problem with her. I just couldn't really get into it. The thing about this book is that I think if you could find an audiobook of this book, especially if it is narrated by the author or by an American Indian, I think that would be a completely different experience because just reading this book, I couldn't quite get like the author's voice. And I don't know if you know what I mean, but just like their cadence and their sentence structure, it's just all very unique. And I think if this book could be read through an audiobook, it would be a completely different experience because just having that voice of an American Indian or the author, I think would make it a completely different experience and just better, frankly. If you can find the audiobook and it's narrated by an American Indian, it would probably be better than just reading this. So anyway, it's just not for me. It's not a book that I hated. I just couldn't really get into it. So I think I probably left it unrated. So sorry, Maria, it's not really a good book. I admit it. But yeah. Last on the to be read list swap. So again, this was one of my books that she was supposed to read, was July by Tim O'Brien. And this is a signed copy, which I really like. Tim O'Brien is the author of The Things They Carried, which I read the year before last, and I absolutely love this book, and currently I rate this as my second favorite book of all time. The Things They Carried, just spectacular, perfect book, beautiful book. So I read this book a couple of years ago, and then I read this book in The Lake of the Woods, and it was different. It was not quite what I expected from The Things They Carried. It was different. I don't want to get into it because that would be spoilers and I don't want to spoil that book. But I really like that book as well. In The Lake of the Woods, I read it last year. And having read those two books, that made Tim O'Brien like skyrocket up my to be read list. I've bought every book I can find from him. So July, that's a signed copy. I also have a signed copy of Tomcat in Love, and I have several other books by him as well, like Going After Cassiado, which is one of his well-regarded books, and If I Die in a Combat Zone, Box Me Up and Ship Me Home. That's, I think, his debut novel. And I also have a book from him, The Nuclear Age, and I may have another couple books by him as well. I don't know. That may be it. But anyway, basically, Tim O'Brien became a must-read author for me for The Things They Carried and In the Lake of the Woods. July, I came in with real high expectations, of course, because I really liked The Things They Carried and In the Lake of the Woods. So I began reading. The first chapter or so, I was kind of like, it's okay, it's not great so far, and I was kind of worried about that. But then I was like, well, you know, In the Lake of the Woods, I wasn't like blown away by it at first either. It took a while for me to get into it. So I gave it a chance and I kept reading. Then I did come across a couple stories that I really liked. In particular, one that stands out to me was there's this flashback of this guy in Vietnam and he's wounded and he starts like hearing voices. And to me, that was just like vintage Tim O'Brien, like, yep, this is all the reasons I like Tim O'Brien. He's just a real good writer, and the way he blends like truth and fiction, I just really like it. So that chapter really made me think, yep, this is another masterpiece. The plot of this book is about the class of 1969, and so you have scenes set in 1969, July 1969. And you see what is happening with each of these different students in this class and like their relationships with each other. And then it cuts like, I don't know how many years into the future, like 40 years or something, where they're at one of their reunions. And so you're kind of seeing like what's happened since then and what they're doing now and what they think about these events from their past. And so what it kind of tends to do is the chapters set in the present will feature one or two characters and then it'll go into the next chapter and show like what happened to those specific characters in 1969. So that's basically the premise of this book. Now, the thing about this book, I did enjoy largely the chapters set in 1969, just the stories Tim O'Brien comes up with. These weren't exactly like great characters, I thought, but I really liked Tim O'Brien's writing style, and so I liked the 1969 chapters. But then what would happen, it would jump into the present, and all of a sudden, even though I just read a chapter about 1969, I would forget who all these characters were and like which character did I just read about and what does this character think about this character, and I just don't know. So that was definitely a problem with the book, and basically the characters are just kind of forgetful. I wish I could really explain this better, but on the good side, I did like the 1969 chapters. I did like the writing there and the characterization there. It's just the scenes when it's jumped into the present just kind of killed the book for me, because I realized then that I didn't really like the characters and I didn't really remember the characters, even though I just read these scenes set in 1969. They were just kind of forgetful to me, and so that was not good. Reading these chapters set in the present, I would just know that these are not characters I like. These are not people I would want to spend time with or be friends with or anything like that. They're just not really interesting or good people. I mean, especially like a lot of them felt like very horny, and they're like 55 years old or something. And all they really talk about is sex for a lot of them, and just like who they slept with when they were kids and who they want to sleep with now. And like, hey, I wonder if so-and-so is still available. I could go sleep with him. And it's just like, cool your jets. You're 55. Calm down. So I didn't really like that. And again, just the characters' personalities, it just wasn't working for me. Also, the dialogue in this book, especially from the present, I just didn't really like it, because for a lot of parts, it would be like without dialogue tags. So it'd just be dialogue, 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 without like dialogue, he said, dialogue, she said, sitting up from the table, whatever. It's just dialogue, 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 dialogue. And I can see that working as a form of style, but I think it has to be real good dialogue, real good conversation. And I didn't think it really was. And it was also hurt by the fact that a lot of the characters all seemed like very similar. So the dialogue is both stylistically similar, just dialogue, 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 dialogue. And it's also just like their sense of humor and their like sarcastic attitude or sardonic attitudes. It's just kind of like all these characters kind of talk the same. So even when it's just like two of them in a room together, I could kind of get like, you know, who's talking now, who's talking now. But ultimately, I can't tell these characters apart. And when I read the 1969 chapters and then go back to the present, I forget who they are. So the book just had problems with characterization from that standpoint. So some of the chapters I did like. The 1969 chapters is well written for those chapters. The scene set in the present kind of killed the book to me. So ultimately, rating the book, I think I only give it 2 stars. And if the book was like just 1969 chapters, it could be potentially a 4 or a 5-star book. But in order to get any more than 2 stars, it would have had to rework those chapters set in the present. They just didn't really work for me. They dragged the book down. They made me not like the characters. And it felt jarring because I would forget each character after each chapter. So I hoped I would never encounter a Tim O'Brien book that I didn't like. This would probably be one though. So I mean, it's not like a book that I hated. It's just a book that didn't really work for me. There were definitely those chapters like the wounded guy in Vietnam. And there's also this chapter of this guy who like flees up to Canada to avoid the draft, and his girlfriend doesn't follow him. So he's very bitter towards her for like years and years and years. I liked those chapters, and those chapters kind of showed me like why I like Tim O'Brien. I think he's a good writer. But all in all, the book just didn't really work for me, and I can't say I enjoyed it. And the more I read it, the less I liked it, and the more I realized I just don't like these characters. I don't care about these characters. I don't remember these characters. So ultimately, it just didn't work for me, and it's real unfortunate that it's a signed copy too, because I would like to love having a signed copy of it. But anyway, at least I have a signed copy of In the Lake of the Woods, which I did genuinely like. So anyway, again, Maria, I'm sorry I had to recommend this book. If I would have recommended any Tim O'Brien book, it definitely would have been The Things They Carried. I don't think she's read that book either. So I would have been like, definitely like, you have to read that book. But the whole point of the video was to do TBR swaps. And since I'd already read that book, I couldn't really recommend it for this TBR swap. But anyway, that does it for the to be read list swap. So for me, the big winner was Octavia Butler. I did not know anything about her. I probably would not have read her otherwise because I'm just not much into science fiction. But having read her and liking her writing overall and liking her as a person, just like her attitude, I like her. So if I see a Octavia Butler book, I may pick it up. So Octavia Butler is a positive from this to be read list swap. I hope Maria has some positives as well. I'm not really happy with the books I chose from her or for her. Leaves of Grass and In Scott Momaday, they just didn't work for me at all. Tim O'Brien, it's an okay book, but this I don't think is his best work. So I wish I would have had better books to recommend for Maria, but oh well. Anyway, this was still a fun video though, just because it was different to read books that I wouldn't otherwise read. So I enjoyed it. So anyway, thank you guys for watching. Hope to see you in another video. Bye.